name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Sit up, Aquinas. Well, welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be here, and clearly all of you are too. This is a huge crowd. I'm really thankful for all of you to come. So yeah, tonight the motion is, this house believes that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. Hear, hear. Alright, so, as you so kindly demonstrated, to show approval, you snap or say hear, hear, and then show disapproval, some hissing. Thanks. Alright, so the format for tonight's debate is going to be, first we have our opening speeches from the presenters, the four presenters, two on each side. Those are going to be 6 minutes. Don't worry, I'll shut up soon. And then after that, we're going to have some comments from our beloved faculty, who are kind enough to join us. And then after that, we're going to have a few more prepared speeches, and then we'll move into the open round. And then after that, we're going to have the rebuttals, from a presenter on each side, and then the lightning round, which is another open round, and then the conclusions from the presenters on each side. All right, now on to our presenters for the night. Opposing the motion tonight will be Miss Maria Sammons. And joining her will be Mr. Jared Johnson.
Here, here.
Thank you. Affirming the motion tonight will be Miss Faith Sirilla. She'll get here eventually. And joining her will be Veritas' founder and first president, Mr. Clement Harrold. My name is Peter Sammons, and I'll be the chairman for tonight. You can hiss now. And without further ado, let's get into the debate. All right, we're going to start with the affirming side, Mr. Clement Harrold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here tonight. I must admit, I did not expect this many people for a Harry Potter debate. It struck me as I was preparing for this debate that those of us who want to criticize the Harry Potter series have a couple of problems. The first is that everyone's going to hate us. And the second is that it's difficult to be a real Harry Potter critic, because either you're one of the critics who's never actually read the books, or you have read the books and then you're a hypocrite. So I happen to fall into the hypocritical camp, so I have read the books a couple of times. But nonetheless, I'm going to argue that you should not be letting your kids read this series. To explain why, the sort of lens through which I'm approaching this, in the 12th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus gives that story of the demon that's driven out of a man, and the demon goes and wanders through dry places restlessly, and then eventually decides to return. And he brings with him 7 more demons, and they return, and the state of that man is worse than it was to begin with. And that's really the reason this is the lens through which I view this whole kind of debate and these questions about the media we consume, the literature that we read, is that I think that parable speaks very much to our modern society. I think that the demons that were driven out by Christ and by the power of the early Christians have returned with a 7-fold vengeance in our modern day. So I think we live in a very depraved society, a very sick society, a very morally corrupt society. And in a society like that, we need to ask the question, should a series like Harry Potter be given to our kids? I think if you look at a series like Lord of the Rings, which I can almost guarantee will be brought up tonight as a comparison, what does Lord of the Rings do for the mind of a child? I think what Lord of the Rings does is it tells you that the world is ordered, that there's a providential force in the world, that good and evil exist, and that evil needs to be defeated. Does Lord of the Rings call Gandalf a wizard? Sure. Does Galadriel use magic? Yes. But notice also that Galadriel has to clarify to the hobbits, Frodo and Sam, that the magic that they use the same word magic for the skill of the elves and for the deceits of Sauron, and she says that's a misconception. And so even within Lord of the Rings you have this clarification that yeah, magic is sometimes used ambiguously, but that's because of the confusion of the men and the hobbits. And the magic that's in the Lord of the Rings comes from non-human creatures, these angelic beings. Can we say the same for Harry Potter? Does Harry Potter form the moral imagination of a child to see the world as this life and death struggle between the principalities and the powers on the one hand and the city of God on the other? I would argue it doesn't. And to do that, I'm going to give a sort of analogy. I see Slytherin as well represented tonight. So, by way of analogy, I want to walk through a thought experiment. Imagine if I came up with a series of books, and it's this book where a certain class of members of society send their kids to a particular school. So we'll call the school Hogwash. And this class of society, what's special about them is that they're pimps and prostitutes. And so they're most of them are nice pimps and prostitutes. There's a few of them that are more dodgy. And what they do is they send their little boys and girls to this school, Hogwash. And at Hogwash, students can take a variety of subjects. There's STDs 101, there's Intro to Sexual Fetishes, there's Pornographic Cinematography, that's in the core curriculum, and then further electives. So this is kind of the Hogwash curriculum. Now to be very clear, the activities that take place at this school, they're not like totally like real life things. So like it's in the real world, okay, like it's in modern day England or Scotland, and like a lot of the language is the same as real life sexual depravities and perversity, and a lot of the symbols are the same, and the activities that they do, like a lot of them overlap with real life, but it's not exactly the same. Okay, so bear with me, like, okay, it's not completely the same. And then, also something to be said in favor of this series is that main character, we'll call him Herpes. So Herpes prostate is a damaged young boy, and he goes to Hogwash, and he goes through the curriculum, and what we see through the series, through a series of 7 books, is we see this moral progression that culminates in this beautiful climax of self-sacrifice where Herpes becomes this kind of Christ-like figure, and he's resurrected at no less than King's Cross Station, a beautiful Christian scene, in fact. So my question would be, would you want your kids reading a series such as this? If your answer is yes, you're kind of a weirdo. If the answer is no, then I would ask you why that is. Perhaps the reason that is that even if the activities described in this book, even if the imagery isn't exactly a one-for-one application to real life, there's enough overlap there for this to be morally problematic. And this is our case tonight on the affirming side with Harry Potter. Witchcraft and the occult, as we know, are real activities. Harry Potter is a series that is consciously inspired by the occult. Let me say that again. It's a series that is consciously inspired by the occult. Is everything they do in Harry Potter actual real-life occult activities? Obviously not. But is a lot of the language the same? Yes. Is a lot of the symbology the same? Yes. Is it inspired by the occult? Yes. Are a lot of the activities the same? Hexes and charms and divination, spells and potions. Is this real life stuff? Yes, it is. And so we need to ask this question, do we want our children, do we want any children in this sick society of ours consuming this stuff? And so our arguments tonight are very simple. Number one, we should not read this series because it presents the occult, which is offensive to God, in a positive and exciting light. And that is offensive to God. That's the first reason we should not give it to our kids. The second reason is that a child's imagination is incredibly fertile, that they're very impressionable, and again, we should give them series that are going to make them conscious of the spiritual battle, not dilute that battle in their minds. That's the second reason. And then the third reason is that in this culture, we need to be witnesses, we need to be salt, we need to be light, and so we should shun pagan forms of entertainment and instead focus on forms of entertainment and literature which are good, true, and beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Do we have a question? question for the presenter? Yes, Rick.
So I was wondering, with your argument comparing Harry Potter to like an imaginary prostitute world, would you say like the conclusion of your argument that Harry Potter should not be read because it is parallel to witchcraft? Would you make a similar argument for something like Pokemon that's parallel to like an ancient Japanese, what do you call it, religion?
Yeah, I don't know very much about Pokemon, to be honest. So sorry about that. I think, so here's what I would say, and I think it's a good question, and I think what we're going to find tonight in this discussion is we're going to find it's difficult to define terms, and we're going to find it's going to get pretty complicated, because I think these questions about literature and approaching entertainment as Catholics are very complex, and a lot of these are open questions. With these series, you know, we have things like Percy Jackson, things like Star Wars, things like Harry Potter, things like Pokemon, which I don't know about. What I would say is this. I would say in tonight's debate, it's the opposing side that has the burden of proof. Okay, so I've just given you a 6-minute argument for why our kids should not read Harry Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Harrold.
And given that, we don't have to go through every series that's out there and give our opinion on whether or not it's good or bad, because that would require its own debate. The point is, they need to be able to respond to all of the objections that we've made.
All right, now we will have our first speech from the opposing side, Miss Maria Sammons.
Now, as far as Mr. Kirby's prostate goes, I'm going to let my colleague, Mr. Johnson, answer that argument. But as far as the motion, this House believes that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. Something I've heard for this motion a lot at Franciscan is that it might be bad. Maybe you've heard bad things about it, you've heard it could be harmful, so why risk it? Why risk giving your kids a book that could harm them? There are so many other good books out there, saint books, Lord of the Rings, the Bible, whatever. So why let your kids read Harry Potter? To answer this, I think first, you should be a little more critical of everything your kids are reading. There are books out there that are not Christian that your kids should read because they're good literature and they're going to hear about them at some point in their life. Not all books your kids should read are going to be explicitly Christian. Not all good books are explicitly Christian. You should know what your children are consuming. You should read books with your children as opposed to giving something to your children and hoping it doesn't harm them. Now, the two main Christian arguments against Harry Potter that I've heard are that it contains elements of witchcraft and that it promotes bad behavior of some sort. Now, Mr. Johnson will go more into the witchcraft, but about that I would say there are books at any bookstore you go into on witchcraft, on actual real evil witchcraft. You can go into Barnes & Noble and see those. Those books are not like Harry Potter. They contain maybe instructions, they contain real elements of evils like that. In Harry Potter, you won't find any way to do witchcraft like you would in those books in the bookstore. Now, as far as people saying that in Harry Potter there are bad examples, there are bad characters that are presented as good, I think these people maybe haven't read the whole series, but that's okay, because I know a lot of people here haven't, so I will try to explain it simply. Yes, especially in the first few books, the good characters, the main characters, maybe go against authority. Maybe they do something they were told not to do, and they end up saving the day. Maybe you think, now your kid isn't going to obey you anymore. But further on in the series, there's an special example in the 5th book where Harry does go against authority, and someone very close to him ends up dying, and he's kind of kicked off his high horse. There's this thing called character development, where he had gotten to this point where he had gotten away with so much as a young teen that he felt pretty special. He was kind of, walking around, I'm the chosen one, I can do whatever I want, and guess what? That didn't work out for him. Now, as far as, also in the maybe 6th and 7th book, there's a lot of stuff that maybe implies that the government is not so good. Everyone I know in this room is going to say something similar to their kids, but government authority, is not infallible in the books, and so the good characters recognize that and they go against that. But as far as parental authority, it is given utmost respect in the books. Is it always followed? No, because kids don't always do what their parents say. Is it respected? Yes. Harry is an orphan, and in every single book, it mentions him wishing he had parents, wishing he had that guidance, wishing he had someone telling him what was right and wrong. Instead, he has the hard life where he has to figure that out for himself. But he seeks out other parental figures, through his friends' parents, through his godfather, and through other authority at his school. He is constantly looking for parental authority, and the good of parental authority is shown to him. Now, in the 7th book, he's an adult at that point, and he's 17. He doesn't need that authority anymore necessarily, but he takes what he has learned and he does good. If you asked me what the theme of this 7-book series was, the answer would be easy to me. It is about the goodness and the strength of a mother's love. That's what this series is about. It is about the power of friendship. It is about doing good to defeat evil. It is about being good when it's hard. It's about sacrifice. Anyone who's read the 7th book could tell you that the series is about the good of sacrifice and the good of love. I believe that you should let your kids read Harry Potter because it is a book that, while not being Christian, will teach your child the nature of good and the nature of evil. There are plenty of Christian book series, and there are plenty of other series that teach your child about good and evil, and about how good overcomes evil. And yes, this series does that, but it will also show your child that sometimes there is a world where you can't tell what's good and you can't tell what's evil, and that's hard to figure out. And you can make good friends, you can find good authority figures who can teach you those things in a world that's a lot like our own, where sometimes it's hard to tell what's good and what's evil. And Harry Potter can teach your child that.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Do we have a question for the presenter? Please stand. Yeah, right here.
So, something you talked about was just the confusion between what to do in life. And sometimes listening to authority is good, and other times it's not. And I was wondering if you could give maybe a more specific example from the text that might show a child how to discern between whether or not it's appropriate to say no to authority. Because otherwise it seems like it would just be even more confusing. And in fact, if Harry Potter, still promotes good friendship and things like that, but the means to that friendship aren't good, it seems like we kind of have like a Machiavellian issue here where it's like, oh, the ends justify the means. And that would be concerning to me. So I didn't know if maybe you could provide some examples from the text that would show us how to discern the good between the evil, and if we can use good means to come to the good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad I can speak on this more. I can think of a few very clear examples. So Harry's raised by his aunt and uncle. That's for the first 11 years of his life, that's who raises him. And he knows that they are not good people. They, talk badly about other people, they ignore him, they abuse him. He knows that those are not good authority figures for him. And so it's really a wonder that he turns out as well as he does with that. In the first book, when he kind of has his first taste of the outside world, the wizarding world, outside of his aunt and uncle and his cousin's family, he immediately makes a friend, a good friend from a large family of 7 kids or whatever, someone who treats him with respect, someone who is nice to him, and he wants to be friends with that person. He then very quickly after that meets someone who talks badly about other people, who hates people that are not wizards, who discriminates basically, who has an awful family, and everything like that. And that person is Draco Malfoy, obviously. And that person asks basically to be like comrades with Harry, and Harry says no. And so I think that the way in Harry Potter that they show how to determine good and evil, it is relatively simple. You can tell if someone is a good person, and you can tell if someone is a bad person. And so when Harry's entering school, he immediately sees that, and he's able to make that judgment call. Obviously, there are some people where it's more of a gray area, but as far as Harry's friends go, he knows they are good people. And as far as his enemies go, he knows that they are evil people.
Thank you. For our third speech from our second speech from the affirming side, we have Ms. Faith Sirilla, also featuring crutches.
So tonight I will be affirming this motion, and my two main points to support this will be firstly that J.K. Rowling's viewpoint of morality is fundamentally flawed and that children are extremely impressionable. My second point will be that the themes of magic in Harry Potter are go against church teaching, and they are not, it's not able to be picked out by children what's good and what's not. So while I was doing my research, I went down a rabbit hole and I found myself on a Wiccan blog post website. So I'm gonna need, if anybody knows an exorcist that they could, pray over my laptop, maybe sprinkle a little bit. But anyway, so J.K. Rowling's viewpoint of morality is fundamentally flawed. She's a liberal, she's a feminist, she supports abortion and same-sex marriage. An author's writing is an expression of their belief, and what they hold to be true is going to be a real undercurrent in their writing. So children, to a certain point, may not have the ability to discern whether or not an author is portraying morality correctly, or whether they're portraying the truth. So today, the motion is this house believes that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. And I think that's really crucial to my argument, because kids are not going to be able to, they may not have, sorry. Children need to be formed in the truth. They do not need to be formed by reading lies. The point of discernment comes later on in life, and I'm not attacking the book as a whole yet, but it's just really dangerous to hand to children, and this is because the undercurrent, a really main theme in the book, is that magic is a fundamentally good thing. It can be used for evil, but you should learn it, and you should use it. And additionally, magic is portrayed as a natural science, and using the forces of nature to change something or affect something. And that is directly parallel with what Wiccans believe. Wiccans believe that they are using the forces of nature to, through spells and hexes, to affect something. But the church teaches that what Wiccans practice is either, if they mean it explicitly or implicitly, they are making a pact with a demon to affect nature. Humans do not have the power to do. So I don't think you can argue with me that it's okay to use magic. But the big theme in this book is magic. And you can say, well, what about Lord of the Rings? So Gandalf, he uses magic, but if you see, Gandalf is an angel, he's a form of angel, and it's within his nature. He's not harnessing some outside force to affect exterior things. Additionally, additionally, in Harry Potter, it does not state what the source of the powers, and there's no reference to God ever. So I think that with these problems at hand, as an adult, any of you in the room, I think you're completely capable of reading this and weeding out the flawed morality, the bad portrayal of magic. But as the motion states, it says it's also that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter, and kids may not have the ability to discern that, so you must affirm the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. I have a question for the presenter. Thank you. You mentioned that in Harry Potter, magic is portrayed as a good thing. When I've read Harry Potter, that hasn't been the impression that I've got in any of the 12 times. So magic seems to be portrayed as a neutral, because it can be used for good and evil. And also, those who aren't able to use magic are portrayed as no worse than those who are, except by the purebloods who are evil, like the racists of this society. So why did you say that?
So I think you're mistaken in your interpretation. I think that, so if you think that it's a neutral thing, why would there be a school, an entire academy, that this whole book series is based off of, an academy where they teach you to use it? If it's just a neutral thing that's out there, they seem to think it's a good, so they formed this institution to teach it.
Fair. For our second speech on the opposing side, we have Mr. Jared Johnson.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm a Hufflepuff. So, I have to be honest here. I'll explain my biases. I've never read Harry Potter. I've watched 2.5 of the movies. Most of my knowledge about Harry Potter comes from during high school. There was a girl I liked who liked Harry Potter, so I like the wiki a lot. So I know plenty, guys. Trust me. But I grew up with things like Lord of the Rings and Narnia and Star Wars and Percy Jackson. So let's talk about those things for a second, because it'll be a very useful point of comparison. First of all, as Mr. Harrold mentioned, Lord of the Rings and Narnia, they'll probably come up a lot. Get them out of here. They're obviously way better. They're great. One's an allegory, one has explicit Christian overtones and undertones. Like, okay, we know, the magic is different, it's a really different thing. Star Wars and Percy Jackson, though, provide a much more useful point of comparison because they exist in this more secular, middling region where there's some problematic content, there's some good, and you can discern between the two. The fact that we can have an argument at all, and we can point out good stuff in Harry Potter, and you can point out bad stuff in Harry Potter, it means there's both, and now let's deal with that. So, with Star Wars, I think Star Wars is as problematic as Harry Potter in terms of the questionable content. The Force is this weird Eastern dualist thing. It's very unclear. George Lucas, when he created the originals, he was a little more Christian, so it has more Christian overtones. During the prequels, it was more Buddhist. You get things like the dark side, the dualism, all that. And when he was creating the Clone Wars, he was a bit more Christian again. It's this shifting thing. It's really confusing. And I've heard a lot of the same arguments against Harry Potter from...
Extra time. It was a spell.
So, we're back. All right. So I think with Star Wars, it's just as problematic, it's just as questionable. Percy Jackson, they literally worship pagan gods. It's a part of the thing, it's in the real world. If you're quibbling with my argument with Star Wars, well, it's a galaxy far, far away. It's not Percy. They scrape off part of some of their plates to the gods at every meal. All right, they're worshiping pagan gods. But you don't hear the same complaints, or you do. But there's symbolical how do you say that word? I don't remember. There's value in the symbols used in these stories. You tell the Greek gods, especially in the first 5 books, there's a discussion of Western civilization and culture and history. And most Christian parents who had concerns were like, well, it's a good opportunity to learn about Greek mythology and history and all these things. Star Wars, the learning, like the good and evil, the choices between them, and the light side, the dark side, all these things, they're great. Nobody really complains when your kid wants to dress as Darth Vader, right? Like, it's just cool, kids want to do that. So, looping back around to Harry Potter, I think the distinction is with these middle categories like Percy Jackson and Star Wars. Those of us who have really good formative experiences with stuff like that, I think the motion, you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. I don't think you should let your kids read anything, right? I think you need to do it with them. You need to, I think the motion, the premise is that you just kind of like, you know, throw something in front of your kids, whatever. And I think when you do that, it's because a lot of parents don't see media storytelling as anything other than entertainment to distract them for a little while. And so you fall into 3 categories. Entertainment is questionable, so we just get rid of it. Good, and then good, but like a character died, so it's like there's a Christ figure. So it's basically Christian, so it's okay. Right? This simplistic analysis just kind of ruins your ability. The child has an opportunity here. It discounts the effect that storytelling has on, like we've all said, I believe, on the mind of a child, informing the child. It's really important. It informs taste and preference and morals and values and all these things. But no child is going to get it if it's not harnessed and utilized. So the parent has a responsibility not to just let their shove in front of their kids and say, if you do that, if that's your attitude, then it just comes down to like, all right, this thing's questionable, I don't want to deal with it. This thing's questionable, but maybe there's good in it. Maybe my kid is predisposed towards liking this thing. So I'm going to use this, I'm going to draw out the good in it and have those discussions. That's what matters most, I think. There's obvious stuff that's bad. Philip Pullman's, I believe that's his name, The Golden Compass, he set out to create this atheist, secular, humanist Narnia. The worldview is objectively bad, it's set out to do a bad thing, get rid of that. Harry Potter, I think the question is, there's a Christ figure, right? Harry dies and rises, spoilers, I suppose. The morality is overall solid because it's a story in the Western tradition. We have Western values that permeate everything, right? And so obviously good and evil is going to be generally the same. And if there's these points of confusion, like with Star Wars, for example, like becoming one with the Force, like, oh, are there, like, it's this weird Buddhist pantheist thing. 1 minute. Okay. Here's what you do. You sit down with your kid. You tell your kid, this is a weird thing. This is difficult. Let's talk about it. And here's the good stuff in it. And you have those conversations and you develop with your child a moral imagination. You use it as a learning opportunity and it helps them build a critical thinking so that when they're presented with media, they're able to discern through it a lot better. And if Harry Potter doesn't have objective evil, I think a lot of the arguments that perhaps come from exorcists or great, we're going to listen to demons, right? Like the demon said something, the demons said the truth, really? I think that's a complicated point. So I think if it is in this middle category with Star Wars, Percy Jackson, I think Harry Potter, I'm not arguing that it's the greatest literature ever, that you must let your kids read it, that you have to use it. I think there's 10 times better stuff out there. But if you do, then you can. I don't think there's anything objectively evil. And if there's questions, answer your kids' questions.
Please conclude.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, do we have a question for the presenter? Yes, right here in the front row.
Do I have permission to ask 2 questions, 1 quick one and 1 follow-up?
No.
Okay.
Now, what's the question?
Okay. Second question.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, according to Telegram in 2020, J.K. Rowling has the exact same tattoo on her wrist as is on the wrist of Baphomet in the Church of Satan. In an interview in 2019 from BBC, the interviewer asked, "People say your work is the work of Satan," to which J.K. Rowling responded, "Well, it is, and it is satanic, and I think now is the night to say it." Mr. Speaker, would you give your children the work of this author to read, to rear themselves, and to grow as Christians in our community?
Telegram? Telegram? There's a lot of stuff about J.K. Rowling that's out there. I know Father Chad Ripperger, who I respect immensely. Love the guy. He says J.K. Rowling went to which school? What? Where did you hear that? When is that? In fact, you can find counter interviews that J.K. Rowling said, I explicitly did not include Wiccan stuff in my stories because I wanted it to be different. Tolkien talks about, in his essay on fairy stories, creating the inner consistency of reality in a story. He calls it fantasy. So that children can enter into the world, or that anyone who reads it can enter into the world. And it's interesting and engaging, but it helps you be able to discern these things. I think J.K. Rowling, from what I understand, I've heard a lot of those interviews. I don't really have a source on any of them. I tried. I do have a source on a lot of the other ones. I would love to see the Telegram chat.
The BBC.
Okay, the BBC. Please, I'd love to hear about that. I feel like that would make bigger waves. But the point is that when you enter with kids, especially because it's about kids, right? You can differentiate between what's in the story, even the worldview of the author, right? And if that's not, like Dumbledore being gay, it's not in the story. It's a thing J.K. Rowling said. It's a thing. It's not anywhere in the books, from what I'm told from people who've read them. It's just this thing she backwards, projected on. So I think that you can still make those prudential discernments as a parent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All right. That was something. All right. We'll move into our professor round. We're going to have a few 5-minute speeches from the professors. Something different about this one, because I respect our faculty so much, they may ask for an extra minute when they're done if they would like. I may or may not give it to them. So this mic is possessed. For our affirming professor, we have Dr. Theodore Harwood.
Hello, everyone. So, I want to say right off the bat, I only agreed to do this because the gentle lady who is opposing the motion said she would make a poster for me for my very exciting course, Latin for Devout Dummies, Latin 436, which you should all take next semester if you don't have time to take the full sequence of Latin, but want to learn how to understand the Latin Mass. Again, Latin 436, Latin for Devout Dummies. So she's a liar, so you don't trust her. All right. I want to acknowledge a point that's been brought up, I think mostly on this side, though implicitly at least on this side, that you have to be careful about the literature that you give your children. I think that's obviously true. This is a point that goes very far back in the Western tradition. It is not just a Christian point. Plato talks about it at length in the Republic. It's really important that we curate the literature that we give our children because, as Mr. Harrold said, it forms their moral imagination. That is to say, it affects their view of what is good or bad behavior, not just at the rational level, but at the practical or prudential level when they make choices day to day, right? It affects their desires, that is to say. It affects their pleasures and pains. That's a very important point to bring up. Now, I think Mr. Johnson's follow-up point about that was a bit naive. Depending on the age group of children you're talking about, when he said we need to be, we can use problematic passages as occasions to talk to our kids about problematic elements. I think that's true to a certain point. I think all but sort of objectively objectionable material, that's going to be a little bit hard to define. You do have to sort of open your kids to that at a certain point and interact with them because they have to be able to figure out things for themselves. And teaching the honors program, we read things that are bad, right? The easiest example of this, everybody punches, is Karl Marx or something like that. We read him, right? He's really important to read. He's even right about a couple things. Okay, so now you don't trust me because I said that, but whatever. Okay, but at a young age, I don't know, up to I would say maybe like 16 at youngest. It just doesn't work for kids. Okay, you have to be more careful than that. Another thing I want you to be aware of. I really don't think many of you are aware of this. But my generation, I'm a millennial, my generation is obsessed with its childhood. And the reason that Harry Potter is still a thing, even though it was really sort of a passing piece of literature, right? I can name other things from like the 80s that are sort of like this, but are no longer around anymore, is because my generation wants to force everything they did in their childhood, like Pokemon, that was brought up earlier, onto their kids. They think it's an essential part of childhood. Okay, so that's why it's still around. I dare you to think about this and look at how many like remakes of shows, remakes of video games, remakes of books there are. But it's a very common phenomenon. One thing I wanted to bring up, which is sort of a new point, though it falls on something Mr. Harrold said. He said we live in a society that's anti-Christian. I think neo-pagan, you may have said at some point. That's an important thing to think about, because the consensus of the fathers is that Greek literature, what we could call fictional and mythological literature, which includes the play, like the dramas, etc., is bad, that we shouldn't be reading it. They're being polemical when they say that, and they're talking mostly with a view to, sort of the ignorati out in the crowd, who are not unlike children, but they're against it. And I've often struggled with this, because I teach a lot of Greek literature. But in the medieval period, interest in that literature gets revived very strongly. A lot of it on an allegorizing basis. And there's some complex ideas, literary ideas. In fact, a sort of theory of literature is born in the medieval period, I would say, because of that. Why is that possible?
1 minute.
I'll take 5 more things. So the reason that's possible is that paganism is not a live option anymore. The occult is a live option. There's a magical string that goes along all the time, but the occult is a live option. The occult is a live option today. The thing that that is to say, as Ms. Sammons brought up, you can go to the bookstore and buy books on how to practice magic, right? So Harry Potter perhaps opens you to that. Another thing, this was also brought up, like, where is God in the series? And I would say more emphatically, where is a sort of definitive idea of good, or what the good is based on? We have some authority figures. Now I'll say this, I've seen all the movies, but I've never read all the books. My wife read all the books. She used to believe in them. She doesn't anymore. But Albus Dumbledore, I would not say it is like a perfect example. Now, you don't have to have perfect. People can have small faults. Gandalf has small faults too, right? There's another one. Okay, so obviously there's the later imposition that he's gay or whatever, right? But also, I don't know if this is not true, but in the movies he has Snape kill him, right? So he has him do a bad thing in order to achieve a good end. It's just not clear where it's headed. The thing that her morality that she's impressing upon people in the book seems most directed at is the kind of anti-prejudice, right? So the pure bloods are prejudiced. It's like a form of racism, right? And in fact, Rowling has been politically active, and she will compare political figures to Voldemort. She even once said of some action of President Donald Trump, which had to do with whether people from certain countries could come to the US, she said not even Voldemort would do this, right? And some analysts have said it seems like Rowling has set up a generation that thinks in terms of there's Voldemort on the other side and there's us, right? But what is the basis of those sides? That's sort of the concern I have. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Do we have a question for the presenter? All right, right here.
Thank you. Professor Harwood, I would like to argue with your statement that there is no objective good presented in the series. I would like to agree with Ms. Sammons that the objective good presented in the series would be love. It is brought up as a recurring theme, whether shown through Harry's future parental figures or his past ones who died for him. And it culminates in Harry's own sacrifice for that which he has grown up in and grown to love. So I think that that's a pretty good point for kids to read about. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I had forgotten another point. Now you give me time and I don't have to anger Mr. Sammons. So let me reply. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, love is there. Love is obviously a good, right? And so therefore it is directed towards the good, and we can go for it, right? And after all, as we've seen on a lot of signs, love is love. Let me tell you this. Before I was Catholic, I flirted with a liberal sort of Protestantism for a while, and I was okay with gay marriage. And the reason for that is that I thought, look, you could argue with this as a different point, right? But look, I don't want to try to impose too much politically. I don't think it's feasible, but I want to at least endorse commitment, because commitment seems like a good value, right? Like that you're committed to another person, you're going to sacrifice for them to stay with them, etc., right? So there are good values we can identify in there. I think friendship is another one that's good. Friendship is in some ways a lost virtue today, or it's a misunderstood virtue today, right? But you can't have, but sometimes having just some of the virtues separate from other ones, you don't really get the good. What I'm saying is, what's the source of the good there? It's their own internal feelings that are the source of the good. It's their own internal reaction. Like, I know I love these people. This was Miss Sammons' argument, right? Like, oh, he doesn't treat people well. Right? Therefore, I know he's bad. I do. Like, these people love... Okay, that's it. I'll go.
All right, and now for our professor speech for the opposing side, Dr. Alex Plato.
Thanks, Mr. Sammons. Well, our motion today is that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. And I would like to emphasize that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter, which presumably would be if they weren't non-existent. Which presumably would be Catholic kids who are well-trained, right, who have a good catechesis, who are intelligent, who know how to discern things, have a good vocabulary, good ability to think. Those are the kids we're talking about here. Okay? So it's about you guys and your eventually, hopefully, non-existent kids. So I see my mission tonight as trying to convince the Mr. Harolds of this world and others that you should let your kids read Harry Potter. And when I say you should let your kids, I mean your well-trained Catholic kids. So my basic position is this, right? That if reading Harry Potter corrupts somebody's child or somebody's kid, that's not the result of Harry Potter, right? That's some negligence in education, some malformation in catechesis, right? Some alleged sophistical education in how to discern good and evil. That's why they would be corrupted. So is there a burden of truth on me to prove the opposite? No, there's a burden of proof on the other side to just, instead of associating different bad things about it, right, to say why that's the person being corrupted wouldn't be merely accidental to the story. On the flip side, right, if reading Harry Potter inspires people, elevates people, raises them to the transcendentals of good, truth, and beauty, if that happens, that's not accidental. That's a result of the structure and of the story, right, the themes in the story, the obvious proportionality of the good things in that story to any other small imperfections that you might complain about, right, or any prejudices you might have to blow way out of proportion. Now, that's my basic position. And I want to tell you a story about, there was a girl that I know about who was not allowed to read Harry Potter when she was in high school. She got out of high school, she started reading Harry Potter, she read the first 3 books. She got into a lot of very difficult pain and suffering and adversity in her life, and she decided to watch the rest of the movies, which I should say, if for some reason this affirmative motion succeeds tonight, you can always let your kids watch the movies. So at least you can get, they're not as good as the books, and the books, of course, are not as good as Lord of the Rings. I completely agree with that. In fact, I didn't read Harry Potter for a long time out of pure allegiance for Tolkien, who's obviously the king of every fantasy ever. So this girl, she watched these movies, she was going through this adversity, and she got to what is the scene from book 5, right, where Voldemort is trying to possess the mind of Harry. Right, and in that moment, Harry has these memories that come well up in his mind. It's the memories of his friends, of the innocence, right, the beauty, the goodness, the connection he had with his friends. We all know the beauty and wonder of friendship. College is all about this, right? The connections you have, the conversations you have, the depth you have, you remember all those things. So he has this come into his mind, then he has the vision also of his parents coming to mind, whose love saved his life. He's the boy who lived. Right, this came into his mind, right, and then Voldemort fled. Voldemort couldn't possess him because of this, right? That's not a story of like, oh, the pure feelings of love, right? This is about the actual love that came into his memory that was real love. It was the love of their actual friendship, of his actual parents. That wasn't the feelings of the parents. They actually gave their actual life, okay? So it's not feelings, all right? And so that is what inspired Voldemort to flee. And this girl that read this inspired her to realize that love triumphs over evil. That as Boethius would teach, right, in the Consolation of Philosophy, right, that the good are always powerful and the evil are always powerless, right? That the good are always rewarded, are never left unrewarded, that the evil will always never be left unpunished, right? That good fortune is always good fortune because it amends your life or it's just punishment. That is a world, a reality, okay, that is completely irrational, that's from the mind of God, it's a creation of God. That kind of reality, right, is the kind of reality that is a creation. It's personal, it's mysterious, right? It's spiritual, it's magical if you want to use that word, right? It's enchanted.
1 minute.
Okay? That's the world that we live in. Reality itself is a story, okay? So now let's try to figure out some principles that we could use, and I don't have time to develop a framework for judging fantasy stories, but I think that can be done by people, say, like Stratford Caldecott. And so I don't have time to go into that. But in philosophy of literature, which we should definitely talk about at length, we can't because this is a debate, we can talk really fast, right? Is three things. One is reality is a story because it's creational, and history is salvation history. That's a fact, okay? Now, fairy stories as Tolkien taught us, right, are all about not so much the characters and individual things happening, but the world itself, the sub-created world, the secondary world. It's the place, it's the atmosphere, right? That structure is sub-creational. That means it's enchanted, it's magical, it's miraculous, it's mysterious, right? It participates in the story that is reality. That's what fairy stories do. Now, not all fairy stories succeed in rising the mind up. So some stories, to say like, next, some stories like, let's say, Twilight, right, or Philip Pullman stories, right, or Game of Thrones, that drags you down, that uses a secondary world to drag you down, right? But to me, it seems obvious that Harry Potter as a whole lifts the mind up to what's good, true, and beautiful, to the transcendent truth. So let me just conclude with the thought of G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton said in his famous essay, The Ethics of Elfland, and Elfland is just another name for fairyland, according to Tolkien, he's the absolute authorities, you know. Is he said, my first and my last philosophy I learned in the nursery. I learned it from that sullen priestess, my nurse, okay, and I learned about democracy and tradition. And I learned that fairy stories are not fantasies. Fairy stories are not fantastic. They're more real. They're less fantastic, right, than the world that we look around us that's presented to us by this modern practical atheistic, neo-pagan, whatever we want to call it. And so fairy stories are where he says is the sunny country of common sense. So fairy stories are able to give us that. And there might be some minor objectionable elements or some things we might complain about or things our prejudices might blow way out of proportion. But overall, I think that we should allow our kids, of course, under instruction, and your kids that are Catholic, right, etc., to read Harry Potter, to enjoy it, and to benefit in the formation of their moral imagination, right, and I think it would be all the better for their formation.
Yeah. Question for the presenter, Ms. Sirilla.
So Dr. Pettis, this isn't anything involved in what you just said, but how would you address J.K. Rowling as a person is promoting same-sex marriage, all of these liberal ideologies, and will you say that she's not incorporating these subtly into her book? And how do you respond to Cardinal Ratzinger saying that in Harry Potter there are subtle seductions, and this is why we should avoid this book?
The first point about J.K. Rowling is, to me, it's irrelevant, ultimately. I mean, suppose we forgot about who the author was. And suppose these books survived in 100 years and people read them, they don't know who J.K. Rowling, know nothing about it whatsoever. Right? The qualities of the story, art transcends the artist. Right? Tchaikovsky's wonderful, he was a bisexual. Verdi's Requiem Mass, amazing, but he's an atheist. It doesn't matter, art transcends the artist. Those are irrelevant to me, those are giant question-making arguments. So now the question about Cardinal Ratzinger, I don't know what exactly he said or what he referred to, but there's lots of seductions and lots of literature that we read all the time that we think is perfectly normal. So if we zero this one out, then it can't be a principle by which we're zeroing it out. It's a prejudice we have against it. And so, sure, maybe they're on. Fine. Yeah.
Go back. Thank you, Dr. Clement. Just a reminder to everyone, we will have a vote at the end, so stay for that. It's going to be fun. And now we're going to move into a few more prepared speeches on each side. These will be 3 minutes, starting with the affirming side, Mr. Jake Smith.
Learning about good and evil, knowing good and evil from various causes. That sounds kind of familiar because of Genesis chapter 3, where the snake in the garden says, "You'll become like gods, knowing good and evil." So we can't always use that as the basis. But then furthermore, we shouldn't be letting our kids reading it. We should read it with them. Kind of like Adam eating the fruit with Eve instead of just eating the fruit. This seems to be overlooked a little bit. Okay, so good themes here and there in Harry Potter. People doing good things in Harry Potter, except that all the main characters are doing witchcraft, which is a mortal sin. Thou shalt not suffer a wizard to live, thus saith the Lord. Exodus 22. Later on, wizards and witches and those who do sorcery are abominations to the Lord. Now, God wouldn't have to condemn this if it was completely fictional. And now, so the argument arises of, well, what about the witchcraft in Harry Potter? There's not really real witchcraft. Well, that is a misunderstanding of what witchcraft is. The Catholic Church's definition of witchcraft, which can be found in Father John Hardin's Modern Catholic Dictionary, there's two of them. One of them is a form of animism, which basically ascribes to natural things like wood and rocks, things that are not proper to those things, utilizing them in a superstitious manner, which is also a mortal sin, in order to accomplish a task. The other one is utilizing the demonic to accomplish a task. Okay, so spells in Harry Potter, it's just little Latin words, right? Well, okay, what about just Latin prayers? Guardian angel, protect me. So what's the mechanism there? The angels and saints can hear our prayers, and then they can petition God for us, or they can act in concrete reality. The demons can also hear certain things like this, and that's why different exorcists warn against certain things that minimize the danger. So, you petition something, and whether or not God allows it to happen is up to Him.
30 seconds.
2 more minutes.
I'll meet you at 1 more.
That sounds good. All right. Basically, we have to see what the actual Catholic understanding of something is before we can directly recognize what the perversion is. Like, for example, how many people recognize that the hokey pokey is a perversion of the consecration in the Latin Mass? Put your right hand in, right hand out, right hand in, shake it all about. Do the hokey pokey, the hoc est anum corpus meum. That's a perversion that was started by witches. Pretty sinister, but nonetheless, in Harry Potter, it doesn't ever address what the magic mechanism is. It just calls it witchcraft, which we know in sacred scripture is evil. You want to teach kids that witchcraft can be a neutral force, you're malforming their conscience. It's the Father's job to provide and to protect for His children, and not to malform the consciences by washing over certain things that are false, such as witchcraft. You say one thing and then everybody starts yelling at you with the horsel tongue. No, it's very, very sinister. It's not always recognized. But with Harry Potter, it really comes down to, do we delight in the things that God delights in and hate the things that God hates? Or do we ignore those parts because we want to be entertained?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And now for speech from the opposing side, Mr. Thaddeus Kaczynski.
All right, so first of all, this speech is going to be a that's what he said speech, because I don't think I have anything original to say. So the criteria for the debate, I think we need to establish, which is, does the good outweigh the bad? All right, and so in Harry Potter, we've had a lot of talks about whether or not, the focus point is on the witchcraft used, right, as that as a value, or, that seems to be the focal point of this debate, right, witchcraft between, not witchcraft. And I think what's most important is, how do we see morality? All right, so in Harry Potter, the basis of, Harry's existence, the reason why he's there, is because his mother died for him, right? Now that's powerful. If you have your kids reading something, and we've already affirmed that there's an imaginative element to kids, in fact that their imagination develops strongly when they're kids. And so, if that's the kind of the premise that you base your entire world on, right, is this person's alive because his mother loved him and was willing to die for him, what do you think they're going to say? Or what do you think their kids are going to believe? They're going to believe that love is something worth dying for, that your kids are worth dying for, right? And we see that echoed out in Harry's life. He doesn't compromise his values. He loves his friends. He doesn't seek to kill. He doesn't seek to do anything that's immoral, that's wrong, if he doesn't believe to be so. And so he's uncompromising. And we see the characters, we see loyalty. The character through Severus Snape, right? He's this character in Harry Potter who basically is seen as a villain throughout the entire franchise. And in fact, he ends up being the best moral character in the entire franchise. Sorry for spoiling that, but I think it's important to this point. And so what we're seeing in this franchise, right, are values, again, of loyalty, of sacrifice, of love, right? And we're doing it through a very engaging way. All right, so our kids are engrossed in this story. It's fun, it's exciting. There's explosions. We love explosions, right? And so that is enabling them to really internalize these values and really see the importance of them. And so I think the good does outweigh the bad. I think there is a really good, healthy argument to be made about occult practices, right? But I think the most important part is that what are we seeing in this story? Okay, so my final point, I also want to say that, again, there are much better things to get your kids to read when they're growing up. And that's true. But I don't necessarily think, therefore, that you should say you can't read or watch Harry Potter, right? 30 seconds. So, man, that was mean. So yeah, I'll just conclude with this. I will say that ultimately, we need to look at what's being taught in the sense of morality. What our kids are getting from this, and can we address these issues with simple distinctions? Can we have a conversation? Is in fact the use of the occult, right, in that sense, can that actually lead to a conversation? Can we make a distinction with our kids that this is actually bad, that in real life this is not good and it should be avoided? Can we have that discussion? If we can, I think ultimately Harry Potter is okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaczynski. For a speech from the affirming side, Mr. Paul Carl Ward.
Thank you. So, I come before you today, not as a Hufflepuff or whatever chicanery. I come before you as a Catholic man from the nation of Albania. And I want to tell you a little story about a book from my home nation, about an orphan who had to grow up in the mean streets of a city far, far away. You know, he had to live with his uncle and his aunt who didn't treat him well. But he knew that at the end of the day, friendship and love were the most important things. This man was the Prophet Muhammad, and he wrote the Quran. I comment before you today that, let your kids read Harry Potter, let your kids read the Quran, let your kids read the Satanic Bible, let your kids read the Book of Zoroaster, because whatever crank who has his parents die can write some book, it's automatically okay if it's a dualistic nonsense, right? Let's come to the point of the matter. You know, these points that Miss Sammons and Mr. Johnson made, I was thinking in my head the whole time, are they talking about the Prophet Muhammad or Harry Potter? Because it's the same story, over and over again, all throughout time. A person has hardship, and what happens? Oh, they rise to the occasion. Oh, they have a mentor. Oh, they have to fight the jinn, the evil. No, that does not negate the underlying fact that Mohammed, the Prophet Zoroaster, J.K. Rowling, all do not love the triune God. They instead love a demon, pretending to be some higher good or nature. Let's go to Dante. Let's go to the eighth ring, third male bulge, the sorcerers. Their heads are tied on backwards, and they have to walk blinded by their own tears because of their own sorcery. which has perverted God's superimposed omnipotence by trying to look into the future, by trying to manipulate things which they ought not. I posit before you today that if you let your kids read Harry Potter, let's go back to the 1990s, when these books first came out. You know, a group of so-called radicals, being the evangelical of all the Christian denominations, said, if you let your kids read Harry Potter, they're going to be zog-brained transsexual communists. And what do we see today? Zog-brained transsexual communists. I come before you today with an example that this whole Harry Potter business is nothing more than a homosexual rigmarole. An absolute clown of himself. You know, some guy, some man-child brought up Pokemon. It's this idolization of your infantile stage of life, which is inherently anti-Catholic, anti-man, and anti-West. And I posit before you today that if you let your kids read Harry Potter, not only will they become infantile in their thinking, language, mannerisms, cleanliness, they will become zog-brained transsexual communists. Thank you very much.
Difficult task of following that.
Just like you said, I had the difficult task of following that, so I'm going to reframe the question, because we should probably get back to this. I don't know what that rail is. It's not believe that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. I'm going to try to make a distinction. Your kids, just like Dr. Blader said, that when I tell my kids to read Harry Potter, it will be a distinction between fantasy and reality. Harry Potter is fantasy. Reality is different. In a 2021 study that was done by the Turkish study, that was actually backed by the Board of Education. It says that there are 4 main criteria that is backed up that kids remember when they read things. And these are very important when we understand these habits. What they will take from reading Harry Potter. What does literature do? It forms who we are, as we already talked about. The 4 main things that people take in, as from an age 7 to 11, is the personalities and the characters of that you're taking in. Just like we talked about earlier, we have good friendships that is shown in Harry Potter. The second thing that they take in is that they will see the length of the story, and it is good that they read like long-term things. The third thing is that they formed like a well-organized conscience. Harry Potter never makes that line, and he never crossed that boundary that we see from one side to the other. The last thing that they take in is the general themes, and this is why we have certain core principles and certain core books that everybody reads. To Kill a Mockingbird tells us that justice is important for all people. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas tells us that family and friendship is very important. Harry Potter makes a very clear distinction that love conquers death in every single case. The story begins with a mother sacrificing herself for the sake of her child, and that because of that, the child lives. Because of that, death dies and loses. At the end of the story is concluded with Harry Potter sacrificing himself for the sake of the Hogwarts people. And it's only through his resurrection and his renewal of that love conquers death. And so at the end of this speech, it will really come down to what do these kids remember? And the things that they remember is good friendships and that love conquers death.
Thank you. All right, for our next speech, we'll have on the Affirming side, Mr. Van Veer.
Hello, everyone. So, I had a very carefully written out speech prepared for this, and I was going to memorize the whole thing. But I'm afraid that I'm going to have to pull a Nancy Pelosi and shred most of it. Everything that I've said has already been said. And I'm pleased to say that a lot of stuff has been said, for my case, both by my side and by the opposing side. So I want to make the case case that you know a tree by its fruits. You know that Harry Potter is not a good thing to let your kids reading by what is happening to our culture because they read it. And so at first I didn't think of this, but you know, the opposing side brought up a very interesting case of Star Wars, and I said, that's a really good case. I think I'm going to run with that. So I was reading a book about Star Wars. It was one of those books, you know, where it's based on movies and the author just changes it. And so the opposing side says that Star Wars is a lot like Harry Potter. And I'm like, alrighty, let's go. So as I was reading this book, I was like, man, this is really interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff that they were saying about the Force that had these Eastern tendencies. And I was saying to myself, and this wasn't that long ago. And I think I'm a fairly well-educated Catholic person. I know the refutations to these arguments that they're laying out, but I was like, I don't know if I can refute this. And this makes me realize there's a lot in Harry Potter, there's a lot in Star Wars even, that has these tendencies. It's going to draw people away from Catholicism and towards Satanism, towards these Eastern occults. And for that reason, I think you cannot let your kids read Harry Potter. I'm not saying that no one should read Harry Potter. Just like I would never say that no one should read Darwin's Origin of Species, even though obviously both of them are evil books that tend towards Satanism. Now, I want to point out this other fact. You know, the opposing side keeps on saying, oh, you know, well, we can let these kids, or we can read it with them. We can let these kids read Harry Potter. Well, do you give a kid TikTok and just hope that they don't find porn on it? Like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous to say that, well, I just hope that nothing bad comes out of this. I'm going to strike a match next to a whole bunch of flammable liquid and hope that nothing bad.
30 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, is it really worth the risk of letting your kids slip into Satanism? Is it really worth the risk? I think not. And for that reason, I urge you to affirm this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderveer. For our last speech, we have a very special speech. Dr. Plato's wife, Mrs. Plato, wrote out a speech. She couldn't be here tonight, unfortunately, but we're having Mr. Carmody read it for her. Yeah, go ahead.
We begin with a quote from Wingfeather Saga. The winter is whispering, green and gold. The heart is whispering too. It's a story the maker has always told. And this story, my child, is true. Stories are important. Fairy stories, most of all. That is, stories where there is magic. Counterintuitively, they open our eyes to the world as it really is, fraught with magic and mystery. They remind us that there is more here than meets the eye. Miracles abound. There's a world of invisible, spiritual beings that exist closely alongside our own, and a larger, greater story that we are a part of. Epic fantasy stories also form moral imaginations. They help us imagine what it is to be a hero, what it is to triumph over suffering and adversity, promising us that in the end, the evil will get their just reward, and the good, those who triumphed, will live happily ever after. This belief about the fundamental nature of reality is planted deep in our hearts as children through fairy tales and fantasy stories. They stir in us the longing for what is good and fair to triumph, for what is twisted and evil to meet its doom. This belief and this longing are then built up and sustained as we grow through coming to know God and being formed in our faith. We come to understand that there's a real basis for our belief about reality and a real promise to match our longing for the good to be victorious and all to be set right. Then, as life goes on, and our faith is tested by trials and sufferings that push us to the limits of our strength and endurance, the stories are still there to be read again to be remembered. It was the first taught at our hearts what it meant to be brave. When Aslan said to Lucy, "Courage, dear heart," he says it to us as well. And the deep awareness that life, despite its sordidness, its cruelty, its dreariness, its pain, is yet imbued with an ancient magic, is the very spiritual disposition that is most needed when we are required to persevere through difficulties with virtue. So, if you find yourself peeking under the hedges to catch a glimpse of fairies, or imagining downtown 4th Street as a Catholic Diagon Alley, like I do, not me, but that, to my mind, is all the good. You are very close to the truth of things. The sense of magic in the ordinary, coupled with the knowledge of how to behave like a princess in the face of monsters, which is the gift of well-written fantasy stories like Harry Potter, will help you more than anything else live a Catholic life with courage, hope, delight, and confidence in God's promises. So I hope you read it. And we end with a quote from G.K. Chesterton. "Here we have battle and blazing eyes, and chance and honor and high surprise, but our homes are under miraculous skies, where the Yule tale was begun." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond. We will now move into our open floor round. There's only going to be a couple speeches from before the rebuttals. And firstly, I feel that I have to address the elephant in the room.
Someone in here said my name. So
you know,
just showing up. All right. That's not how I meant it. Okay, before Hagrid, in the jumpsuit decided to say that, drop that line and then walked off to the leaky cauldron to go get hammered, I just wanted to say, I'm not attracted to anything besides eternal life and power. My name is Lord Voldemort, formerly Tom Riddle. Tom is short for tomfoolery. If you've read our historical documents and seen the documentaries about my relationship with Harry Potter, you would know this. I get up to a bit of tomfoolery. I'm just goofing around, really. But, funny enough, I'm with you guys. I hate that kid. Seriously, you guys need to think about this. How, the kid defied death, and we already know that that's bad. You're not supposed to do that. I'm just trying to find a way to live forever. And quite frankly, you gotta respect the grind set. You know how much I have sacrificed to make this position? Dude, I don't know. I don't know if you've seen the movies. You might just not be educated on this, but I'm pretty credible in this because it happened to me. Okay? What's I gonna say? I don't like Harry Potter. And they use this really nasty word. I like to call it the L word. It's not good for people to hear. It's sort of like it's this disgusting word. It's called love. And they think that some little happy, good feeling is gonna keep me from hitting my goals. And I don't appreciate that. So I think the realists here know what's up. I think, we got to stop spreading this propaganda that a bunch of 12-year-olds are going to save the world or something like that. It ain't going to happen, really. But yeah, so I just wanted to drop that before I flew off again. See you all. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Voldemort.
No, it's Tom.
Our next open floor speech, we will have Mr. Ryder. Mr. Ryder, I would ask that next time you please dress for the occasion.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I came here very casually, but then I feel my obligation here is to discern through the weeds, even through some of Dr. Plato's, I must say. I don't think that Harry Potter, the reason why we're still discussing it right now, is that it's continually propagated through the culture, as Dr. Harwood most pointedly pointed out, and I think that is a really important point, because I want to get to the real heart of the matter. Parents' choice. I'm in the parents' choice part here. And the reality is, kids, you're not going to be able to control whatever they do. So, and this is where I want to grant to the negative here, is that, you know, yeah, when I was 12 years old, I was watching Minecraft YouTubers who swear like sailors, and I look back and I'm like, why did I do that? And thankfully I abandoned childish ways, put on the armor of God. But yeah, and so in the case that, you know, your kid discovers Harry Potter, like, I have not watched Harry Potter or read the books up until a few weeks ago over spring break, because why? The Harry Potter's so great, it's so good. It's like, you can see the Christian sacrifice in it. And so yeah, I'm like, oh, well, now that the culture has imposed it upon me, I must then discuss and discern through it as my parents taught me, as my Catholic intellectual formation of reading bad books in the honors program with these beloved professors. And so now I can discern through the good and bad. And ultimately I'm like, wow, it's got some good points, like Dumbledore and the mirror. And the first movie's like, yes, it does not give truth nor wisdom. It's like, you're and it's like, yeah, you know, like, don't let your fantasizations like control reality. But the real practical, I think, takeaway from this debate should be, if you are actually conscious of what your kids are reading, you know, we all here clearly define that we shouldn't be negligent as parents, then you do have a choice. You do have authority as a parent in what your kids are going to read. And I don't think just because, you know, the subpar, imperfect literature of which you can derive some good lessons, and so I'm not opposed to reading it as adults, you know, where you can discern through that. But kids, the real practical choice, again, if I'm able to decide that as a parent, there are thousands of books to read. 30 seconds. There are thousands of books to read. So just on a purely practical note, it's like, why am I gonna, hey kids, you should read Harry Potter when there's so many, all the points that Dr. Plato made, you can get the same things from much better books. Lord of the Rings, and the practical decision as a parent, if you're actually aware, like, yeah, you're gonna choose that they read other books. However, I will grant the negative. If they come across Harry Potter and they end up reading it without your permission or without your knowledge, then yes, you should have that discussion. You should discern through the good and bad of them, right? That is your obligation as a parent. And frankly, it's going to do you a lot better than just like, oh, get that out of here. And you're like, wait, but then some people say it's good, and especially, right, our fellow Catholics here. But the practical choice, I have to join the honors program because I know I was way too lazy to ever read all these great books, but now I have. So it's great. And reading is a lot harder than watching the movies. So the very precious time of reading with your kids, if you're actually conscious of your kids reading as a parent, then read better books. Practically.
Sounded like an abstain.
No.
By the way, this is going to be the last open floor speech, then we're going to do the rebuttals, but then we're going to do more open floor speeches after that. We're going to go with Claire Young.
So I heard two arguments from this side of the room that are basically saying, one, there's some witchcraft in Harry Potter, but it's okay, because it's just fantasy. And then we have Dr. Plato saying, and Mrs. Plato saying, but through fantasy is how children encounter reality. So I'm going to let my kids encounter the reality of witchcraft through witchcraft. Does that make sense to anyone? Second, like when a child reads, so going back to me reading Narnia, when I grew up, I have never passed a wardrobe without tapping the back of it to make sure there's not back. I still do that. I don't have it. And I think that's good. I think there's it's the imagination being fostered in a child. Children are so impressionable. I'm thinking back to my childhood and the books I read. And I read a lot. I read probably over 100 pages every day of just books I loved. And some of those books were books my parents did not want me to read, which I hid under my bed. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, I understand why you didn't want me to read those books. Yes, were those points for conversations later on? Yes, but looking back, when a book has truth, goodness, and beauty in it, but when the message is ultimately bad, when ultimately it's poisoned by something else, is when dangerous because it's influencing the children more than ever. When it has the appearance of good, but when it's poisoned by something that's going to subtly influence the child, that's when it's most dangerous. And looking back at books, there are books that have these subtle influences, and they make the child, they present it in the light of love, in the light of friendship, in the light of things like this. But overall, for me at least, I think Harry Potter is poisoned by the explicit content of witchcraft. It's explicitly, they call it witchcraft, I believe. I wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter, so I've never read it. But, I know guys, that's why I'm so awesome, see? But, literally, I know, I agree. But, literally, the subtle influences, and also in our culture today, children get thrown with, witchcraft is common, witches, people dress up as witches all the time for Halloween. Witches are a part of culture, and it's dragging children in, it's leading down, and it's opening doors to the devil. I was having a conversation with a good priest recently, even about like yoga and things like that. Satan is always wanting to enter, and there's good literature out there where you can get everything in Harry Potter without the subtle poison.
Alright, we're now going to move into our presenter reputations. After that, don't worry, we'll have another open floor round as a lot of people want to speak. We're going to start with the opposing side this time. Miss Maria Sammons.
I'll just try to address some of the most general points brought up by the affirming side so far tonight. I think something a lot of people seem to think, or at least it seems like from their arguments, is that there's some sort of scheme going on in Harry Potter. There's some sort of plot to, the whole intention of the books is to get kids into witchcraft. If that's what you think, you probably haven't read the books, but you probably have heard a lot about them online. And maybe you've heard that the author has said, certain things that do seem really concerning, which would make you think that. There are a lot of articles out there about what J.K. Rowling is up to nowadays. Personally, I don't care at all what she's doing. I don't care what her political beliefs are or what she has said, years after writing the books, claiming things about certain characters to seem more politically correct. I think when people get famous, they tend to do those things. That doesn't concern me because it doesn't affect what the books are, what those 7 books are. Sure, maybe if she wrote something now, I wouldn't want to read it because of what I've heard about her. There are articles from closer to when she wrote the books of her saying Christian things, but then there are also, the articles more recently of her saying worse things. So I would encourage you to, for this debate at least, look at the books and not the author. And I also would prefer if people didn't come up here saying, this priest said this to me and this respected figure said this, because we can say that on the other side as well. Anyone could come up here and say, I read Harry Potter and I turned out okay, but I don't think that's a good argument either.
You hear?
Thank you, Ms. Sammons. For the affirming side, reputation, we have Ms. Rowe.
Harry Potter is garbage. Harry Potter, but maybe not what you think. Harry Potter is really, really poor literature. You read it, and it's similar to one of those lovey-dovey romance books that you find in the teen section of your public library. It's really bad. Harry Potter, so Dr. Harwood said maybe Harry Potter is popular today because, millennials are reminiscing about their childhood, they want that for their children. But I think that it's poor literature, and I I think that it's still around because of witchcraft. But I also have to say that Harry Potter, I went down so many rabbit holes on my research, but it was on the top lists for the past 2 decades, along with Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and 50 Shades of Grey. So, I don't know, maybe let that sink in. Like, the fact that it is so obsessed over in this post-Christian society, it's just a little bit disconcerting. On the blog post, the Wiccan blog post website that I was on, I saw that they talked about how this is a good gateway, this will spark interest into harnessing the natural powers of the earth, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't know, that's debatable, but what's not debatable is the fact from Pew Research that showed that in 1990, 8,000 Americans identified as, or associated themselves with the Wiccan group. And in 2008, in that time alone, there were 300,000 people who claimed to practice Wiccan. And I'm just going to leave with, I want to say to the opposing side, and anybody else who wants to give a speech opposing this motion, will bring up some authority, some Catholic authority that promotes Harry Potter and its entirety to give it to kids.
Faith, you can say Harry Potter is garbage, but it inspired me to ask you out on a date. Alright, moving on. We're going to have our second open floor round, 2-minute speeches, the lightning round. Oh, wow. We are going to have Miss Catherine. I'm sorry I can't pronounce your last name.
It's Tripoulis. Thank you so much, everybody, for your wonderful speeches. I'm really glad that we tonight, as Catholics, can all in good faith come together and discuss why it's so important for us to take good care of our children, to not expose them to terrible evils that exist in our culture and that lurk within our culture and really define our culture. And this is something that people are bringing up again and again, that we're, there is this subtle evil, that we're living in a post-Christian world, that our children are so susceptible to this, and that we need to protect them from a terrible evil that lurks in our culture. And actually, what that evil is not specified in this motion at all, but we all know what it is, and we're all agreeing about what it is, and all of our speeches are affirming what this is. And this topic, of course, is consumerism. So the reason why I am going to say you should not allow your children to read Harry Potter is because at this point, and I like the point that people have made about Harry Potter not actually being that great of a series of books, but for whatever reason there's a huge cultural zeitgeist around Harry Potter, and when you look at the kind of adults who are interested in Harry Potter, I'm not sure why this happens, but they must spend thousands of dollars on buying all sorts of Harry Potter paraphernalia. And I think Dr. Harwood brought up a really good point about the millennial obsession for nostalgia and for an extended childhood. And there are so many reasons why our culture is moving us in that direction and pushing us so hard to fixate on childhood. But the main reason why you should not let your children read Harry Potter is because at this point, Harry Potter is nothing more than an attempt to sell fake academic robes to your kids. That's all it wants at the end of the day, is to make money off of your children's gullible, innocent desire to buy things because they have always existed in a context, hopefully, where they are given whatever they want. They have no idea how exploitation and how marketing works. Thank you so much.
All right. For our next open floor speech, we're going to have Mr. Thornton and his broom.
Hey, sorry everybody, I was a little late. I parked this thing out back. I double parked, and I had to turn the tow truck guy into a frog, huh? A frog. Anyway, I have an argument that is in favor of the motion. First of all, imagine that your child read the Harry Potter books, and then you find him after school with the band kids and the chess club and the emos riding on one of these playing Quidditch. You can look it up. It's on YouTube. It's there. Also, at the same time, I know for a fact that one of the the people on this side of the room is a nerd. And I know that because I myself have a fundamental, deep knowledge of Star Wars. And I've talked to him about it until 3 a.m. many times, and I can prove it right now. Right now. What does BBY stand for?
Before the Battle of Yavin.
What can I say? What can I say? Now, at the same time, I have to channel my intellectual. Now, here's the thing about Harry Potter. Can you possibly take magic as a storytelling element and not as a pagan witchcraft thing? Can you use your suspension of disbelief in order to engage this? And lastly, arguments that pertain to fruits. By their fruits, you will know them. I know for a fact that both Sammons have read the Harry Potter books. It's your job to decide which is worse. And also, if by your fruits you will know them, you may become a Franciscan professor! However, I've seen all the Harry Potter movies. I am genuinely in the middle. I was all for, and now I'm all against. I'm going to be swayed if you can give me a substantive piece of witchcraft in the books. And I will change my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Could we have an opposing speech? All right. Mr. Henning.
Look, I used to be one of those guys that Mr. Thornton just spoke about. I hung out with the theater kids. I hung out with the gays, the transsexuals, the communists, as Mr. Lawrence spoke about. I rode the broom in high school. I am not joking. I played Quidditch, all right? And yeah, you know, all the people that liked Harry Potter, that were in love with it in high school, who were they? You all know them, if you went to public school especially. They were the nerds! They were the gays! They were the theater people! Alright? But let's forget that part. Oh, PTSD! Look, you have to oppose this motion because the Harry Potter series just came out with a brand new video game, which is an RPG, open world, epic game where you can do anything as a wizard. Now, how am I supposed to leave my wife and soon-to-be-born child to fend for themselves while I play this video game for
30 seconds.
While I play this game for 10 hours a day, non-stop?
15 seconds.
If I support this motion, you can. And I'm not going to say Harry Potter is gay, and so are you for liking it.
All right. Can we get some thought, maybe? Mrs. Sirilla.
I'm overtired, so I don't know if I actually have anything good to say. And Peter, I hope I didn't make you feel pressured to call her. True story, I didn't let my kids read Harry Potter growing up. We have a 4-story house that is falling over with books. It is so full of books that my oldest son once said, Mom, could we maybe get enough bookshelves to actually put the books on? It's just a lot of books. We all love to read in our house. Nonetheless, once I found in my house a Harry Potter book, even though it was verboten, and I asked everyone, where did this book come from? And nobody knew. So I put it on the grill and lit it on fire. Turns out it was the Play-Doh's copy that someone had swiped from their house. True story. This is what I want to say about this. The resolution is, this house believes that that's totally true story. That you should not let your kids read Harry Potter, and I only came at the end, so I might be missing some stuff. But the witchcraft element, you know, I love fantasy stuff. Of the tons of books in our house, a lot of them, we have the Andrew Lang fairy series, we have Grimm's Fairy Tales, all sorts of fantasy, fairy, magic stuff, which is great. But I think we're in such a black time in our culture. Our culture is so troubled, and it's very subtle, and our kids are growing up in such a dangerous environment that this is what I want to say. Whether they would get interested in witchcraft or not, I have a very hard time believing that this author, because of things I'm sure other people brought up, really fundamentally understands right and wrong, good and evil. So her understanding of fantasy, magic, and fairy stories, I don't believe is fundamentally coming from a place that points you to real good and evil. Someone got up and said, at the end, these stories always show that love wins over death. But love of what? Love of man? Is it a humanist kind of love? Maybe not. Maybe someone can tell me otherwise. But I think we do have to be discerning. I think this is a hard time to raise children, and I think let them read lots of great stuff. But I wouldn't introduce them into anything that's iffy without, on purpose. And if you find books lying around the grill, it's always a good option.
Miss Sirilla, are you able to disclose which child and is she presenting tonight?
My lips are sealed. I'll take it to the grave.
Thank you. All right, for our next open floor speech, we will have Mr. Spielden.
It's unfortunate because my wife was sitting next to me and also wanted to speak, but maybe next time. It's actually funny because she's more informed than I am. She's read the books, I haven't. It's a source of marital strife. No, it's not. Actually, I just wanted to speak to two arguments. I've never read them. I could be persuaded either way, but I think that there are two bad arguments for the motion. And I just want to talk about those for a minute. Mr. Ryder talked about how there are better books. And so, why would we waste our time on Harry Potter? And I think that that's a fallacious argument, and here's why. Because that is true for every book except for the Bible. Amen. There's always a better book for you to read. I don't know, you wanted to read Lord of the Rings. Why would you read Lord of the Rings? The greatest story is in Genesis and in the Gospels. And I think that's true. I think it's true that the Gospels are a better story. Does that mean that we shouldn't read Lord of the Rings? Absolutely not. It's it single-handedly made me an English major. You're welcome. The second argument actually deals with a stronger, and by that I mean more, and it tries to make the point harder, argument of the same way, which is to say that Harry Potter is just too risky. It's just a risk to our souls, and so maybe even if you're not totally sure, there's a risk, right? And you can't be putting your soul or the souls of your children in danger. And I totally agree with that, right? Not in regards to Harry Potter, but in general. The problem is that rumors aren't risks. You can't just make a claim. If I were to say, did you hear J.R.R. Tolkien? J.R.R. Tolkien hates the Eucharist. And then and everyone's like, wait, you what? And then but that's a rumor. But it's funny because Jared mentioned that Father Chad Ripperger, claimed that J.K. Rowling went to which school? And this is a claim that goes around the internet. This is a popular claim against J.K. Rowling. Do you know where that claim started? The Onion. Father Chad Ripperger, in a Q&A, cited this. It originated from The Onion.
Please.
These are the sorts of things that we are backing up. J.K. Rowling claimed in 2007 that her stories were based on her regular attendance at a Protestant church. For every J.K. Rowling claim for later, after she became liberal, or maybe she was always liberal, but you can find other evidence. Mere rumors are not risks. So if the affirmative side is able to present a positive, persuasive case that this is bad, then they've won. But merely casting doubt isn't enough. Because there's a lot of misinformation, and mere rumors aren't risks. Rumors aren't risks.
Thank you. All right, for our next open floor speech, we will have the lady in the red right here.
Thank you very much. I would what's your name, sir?
Alex.
Alex actually addressed one of my points, which is we can read better books. Well, I can tell you, personally, I have read Percy Jackson. I have read The Hunger Games, most of. I have read The Maze Runner. I don't recommend it. I can tell you Harry Potter is better than any of those. And that probably makes it better than 50 Shades of Grey, which I haven't read. But the other thing I would like to address is the idea that in Harry Potter, you, Miss Young, I think, said that if the main point of the series is evil, then there's no point in reading it. Okay, that's a fair point. But if you read the books, the explicit point made by the books themselves, not by anybody else, but by the books, is that friendship, sacrifice, and love are the most important things. And death is the main theme, but death also ends in resurrection for Harry, so I don't know, that sounds pretty Catholic to me. So any argument that says that the main point of the series is magic, which it's not, Hermione Granger, one of the main characters, is the daughter of two non-magic parents. Non-magic people are treated with respect and not treated as lesser beings by Harry. Magic is not the main point as said by the series, yes sir. But if you talk to people outside the series, they can make it the main point. You can hear rumors, you can hear fear-mongering. If you want to prove to me that magic and witchcraft are the main point of Harry Potter, give me a real textual context for that. But the main point of Harry Potter, in my opinion, is still love. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize, but this is going to be our last open floor speech. And we're going to go with Mr. Sheckler.
Alright, so some people have touched on this. I think the point of magic is completely irrelevant. It's a plot device. The author Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I have no idea how my iPhone works. I don't drop it in the toilet, okay? We don't, beat our children up for putting on magic shows and, doing card tricks and everything. I'm not going to slap TJ, he's not there anymore. But I'm also not going to slap him for doing the card trick because those are cool, right? We recognize that they don't have an inherent threat. It's a plot device. So I think the argument for magic is incredibly weak. Just because it's introduced to the world as magnetism or electricity. It's a neutral force that can be used for good or evil. However, Harry Potter follows the hero's journey. It's something that every story ever created follows because nobody wants to hear it if it doesn't have inspirational elements. And I'm going to posit that the motion should pass on account of the fact that not only do we have the hero's journey and the things that incentivize people to read or watch a movie in the first place, we also have elements such as Harry is always right, ignore authority, the ends justify the means, and other things that are repeated over and over again. They're not instances. And in the instance of Snape killing Dumbledore, brewing illegal potions, so on and so forth, breaking out of school grounds, doing a bunch of very risky, illegal stuff, putting other people in danger, it's portrayed as a good thing because it serves the end that the heroes are pursuing. That is not something that I want my children to believe, and I don't think that's something you should want your children to believe either. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone who's mad at me because I didn't let them speak, I'm sorry. Come see me after and I'll give you $10 or something. All right, now we'll go into our conclusions. We're going to start with the opposing side because Mr. Harrold isn't here yet. And we'll go with Mr. Johnson.
Clem D-aged, I guess. Alright, so I just want to address very briefly. I looked up the Baphomet tattoo thing, and I looked up her saying that it was Satanist. If you read the rest of the quote, she was being sarcastic because of arguments like this. She said her PR agent is sitting there with her head in her hands laughing about because it was sarcastic. And the tattoo, it's complicated, it's this difficult thing. The phrase is not inherently satanic. That aside, the main argument against Harry Potter seems to be magic, bad. Magic, real world, bad. Magic in story, bad also. Therefore, Harry Potter, bad. Right? And I don't think that this holds. J.R.R. Tolkien in his On Fairy Stories talks about, he makes the analogy of the soup of stories. That things enter into the story world, elements of real life, everything enters into this soup and then it is transformed and becomes an ingredient in another story. This has been addressed already, but the idea that magic is the theme of Harry Potter is not true. It is an element of the story. The idea that why do they have school if magic isn't good? Because why do you have science schools? Why do you have math schools? Why do you have anything? Because it's a thing in the universe. And I think when children read these books, when anyone reads these books, because it's in the story, you're automatically able to make the distinction. This is not necessarily true. This does not necessarily point to real-world behaviors I should follow. It creates an atmosphere, it creates a vibe. This is what Tolkien calls fantasy, inner consistency of reality. He says, any author can say, there's a green sun. A good author can make that make sense. And I think that's part of the magic in Harry Potter is part of the world, and you can make that distinction. And I think that that's the distinction parents should make with their kids and should teach their children. I don't think, if J.K. Rowling had chosen any other word than witchcraft, I don't think it would be an issue. She did use that word. That's a problem. That's something we can talk about, but I don't think that discounts the entirety of the work. Thank you. That helped, actually. And I think we constructed this idea, this framework for the argument that there are what a story should be, that good, we're talking about good Catholic kids who are being formed morally, and does Harry Potter fit into this framework or not? I like the last speech mentioned, Harry Potter has elements of the hero's journey, it's inspiring because that's what a story does. That means it's not the inherent agenda, like my colleague said, there isn't this sinister agenda undergirding Harry Potter that's trying to attract kids to Satanism. The fact that it is another story with elements of the Western world means it either falls into this framework, it's like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, Hunger Games, any of these stories that you can use if your children want to read it, or interested in it, or if you think it's good, or I just don't think that there's anything that objectionable that's intrinsically evil within it. Because it's like the magic's part of the story world, not the real world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Now, Mr. Harrold wasn't here a minute ago when it was his time to speak, but you know what they say, a wizard is never late, so.
Thank you, sorry about that. Thank you everyone for this debate tonight. This is very interesting, and I do think it gets into some very good questions. Just to take up a point that Mr. Johnson made, he was quoting from Tolkien's On Fairy Stories and saying that Tolkien says, it's okay to have a story where you have a green sun. And that's true, the sun can be green in a fantasy story, but I think if you go on and read the rest of Tolkien's essay, the point he also makes is it's okay to have a green sun, but it's not okay to have a universe where the moral order is disturbed, where the moral order is perverted. And so that's the question that's in front of us. We're not against fantasy literature, obviously. We're not even against superpowers. That's fine in a fantasy context, and as Mrs. Plato's letter showed, that can be really good and true and beautiful, but what we're against is the glamorizing of the occult, the trivializing of the occult. So it seems to me tonight, I began with 3 arguments, and it seems to me that these really haven't been particularly well addressed by this side of the House. I said that firstly, a problem with Harry Potter, a reason you shouldn't give it to your kids, is that a child's imagination is really fertile, it's really impressionable. And I think this is something that we're sometimes naive about, and it's not just that, it's all of our imaginations are very susceptible. And I think in our modern culture as Christians, I think a lot of us are much more compromised than we like to admit. That we consume a lot of violent entertainment, a lot of sexual entertainment. We consume these things and we think we have the arrogance to say, look, I can watch this extremely violent portrayal of somebody killing someone else, or in a video game or a movie, or I can watch this sex scene because it doesn't go that far, and I'm good enough at discerning whether or not this is going to affect me. But then, if somebody showed us a video of somebody kicking a puppy, we'd be really offended by that. Why is that? Why am I okay with someone being shot in a gruesome way on camera, or I'm okay with a sex scene, but I'm worried about a puppy being kicked? It's because we've been programmed. We're programmed by the society in which we live. Symbols matter. These things that we consume matter. They affect our imagination. And so for children, that's especially true. My second argument was that to glorify the occult in this way is offensive to God. The Catechism talks about the occult as being gravely contrary to the virtue of religion. There is no religion in Harry Potter. There's Christian themes, but the Gnostic heresy of the 2nd and 3rd centuries also has Christian themes. The point is Harry Potter isn't supportive of Christianity, it's parasitical on it. It takes Christian themes like any half-decent story, but then it perverts them and it dresses them up in the language of the occult. Mr. Johnson said it's not about magic. okay, maybe that's not the central theme, but it is the central literary medium. That's what makes Harry Potter what it is. Everyone knows it's a book about magic, it's a book that's dressed up in all the trappings of the occult. And then my third argument was the argument from being witnesses. And I think it was striking to me that most people on this side of the house tonight seem to agree that the series is full of problems, and they just say, yeah, it's got a lot of problems, but you can teach your kids to discern them. And my point would be that in a culture such as ours, where, as I said, we seem to have had this returning of demonic forces, the Prince of Darkness, I think, is very alive and well in our modern culture. In a culture such as that, we should ask ourselves very seriously whether our kids are being the kind of witness that they should be when they consume series like this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrold. All right, now it's time for the vote. This house believes that you should not let your kids read Harry Potter. If you affirm the motion, please stand and raise your hand. All right, you can sit down. If you oppose the motion, please stand and raise your hand. Sit. And if you would like to abstain, please stand and raise your hand. You know, every month I hope for a society where we have no abstainers, but every month I'm disappointed. All right, with a vote of 68 to 53 and 11 abstaining, this motion has passed.